What's up, my friend? Welcome to the Finding Direction podcast. My name is Stu Massengill, and I'm here every single week to bring you a passionate guest or message dedicated to helping you find your purpose so that you can live a life full of passion, fulfillment, and happiness. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for hanging out with me, and let's dive in. Luke Iorio, welcome to the podcast, man. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here, man. I'm looking forward to it, Stu.
Yeah, me too. And so I figured where we could kind of dive in is just get right into it. And I would love to learn from you if we jump to the phase of your life where you start to dive into basically the professional chapter of your life, right?
Sure.
You know, some people call it you're taking a step into the real world, you're, stepping into yourself and your purpose and all of that. And I would love it if you could take our listener and myself and just walk us through what were sort of those first steps for you as you started to walk into your professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to get into the professional side of things, the one piece of personal background that's important, for especially for a show called Finding Direction, was that when I was 5.5 years old, my house, childhood home, burned to the ground. And so for me, when we talk about something like finding direction, most of my journey has been about finding home again. And so for me, when I went out into my professional pursuits, I did a lot of things. I went out first to try to find my way towards success and what achievement looked like, and all the things that we think, we're kind of full of in our early 20s. We're going to go out, we're going to change the world, we're going to have all the material things, the titles, the whole thing. And I learned very quickly over just about a 3-4 year period that was not going to be my path. And that path got interrupted while I was in my second job. I was on my way into New York City on 9/11, and I was going to Midtown. I wasn't going to downtown that day, but I was one of the last trains that thankfully was cut off so we couldn't get into New York. And I watched the rest of the events unfold from the Great Lawn next to Hoboken Terminal. And so for those that aren't familiar with the New York area, only about a mile, not even a mile across the river from where everything was happening in Lower Manhattan. Dang. And I went away from that day, and it just kind of cracked me wide open again in the way of my heart just reopened, my emotions reopened. They'd been shut down for quite some time. And I recognized that I wanted to be on a very different path, that the typical corporate pursuits and pursuit of job and money and things like that was not going to cut it for me anymore. And
Quick question in there. So what were you doing at that point? And what was sort of like, if we go into your psychology, I mean, obviously you see 9/11 happen from very close. I mean, I saw it from a TV. I was 12 years old. I mean, it was very, very different experience. Yeah. So I'm curious for you, like, what were you currently doing there? If we dive into that just for a second, and then what was the emotional sort of
absolutely
awakening that came, I guess.
The professionally, I was in a marketing communications job working for a couple 100-person IT company that had this unbelievably unique gift that they had crammed the bureaucracy and politics of a Fortune 500 into about a 300-person company. And so it just was not the environment that I was thriving in, right? It introduced me to, like, guy, this is not where you want to be. Yeah. But nonetheless, I was cutting my teeth. I thought I was climbing somewhere. I thought I was moving up in the world, and that this was going to look great on my resume for the next position. And I was kind of in that mindset.
Yeah.
And I'm heading into the city to run an event actually for the company as part of an industry association we were part of. And that's when I get interrupted. And I got to give you a little bit of this story then to give you the whole shift of this. Please. Is that we when we were coming in on the train, we didn't see that what had actually happened to the tower. We just knew that one of the towers was on fire. And when we pulled into Hoboken Terminal, that's apparently when the second plane hit. And so while we're being ushered out of the train station, because we're not allowed to go into the path trains into New York, and we're being ushered out onto this large lawn, this park that's next to Hoboken Terminal. And as we're walking out, all of a sudden you get to this moment where you round the terminal building and you look towards Manhattan, and you now realize everything's on fire. And both towers are now smoking, and everything is going up. And so now everybody's out on this lawn and just completely uh, just struck, just
Yeah.
dumbfounded, in just sheer terror of what is going on. And it was not that long later that the first of the towers fell. And that's actually the biggest thing that impacted me. I can tell you to this day, I know I was looking at the tower when it fell. I can't tell you what I saw because it
Mm.
just my mind won't process that.
Yeah.
But when it crashed, we were with about 10,000 people maybe on that lawn overall. I'd say more than half of us fell to the earth at the same moment because we had no strength left. And I felt some form of energy plow through us, and just, I mean, it was this wave of grief and sadness and sorrow and terror that went through us
Mm.
at that moment. At least that's what I felt in my heart. And I was pretty well emotionally like shut down from my earlier age. Like,
Yeah.
having safety taken away from you when you're 5.5 years old, you kind of, you become very, very, I became very self-reliant. I became very emotionally shut down, and this just
Mm.
broke me wide open. And then that night, after getting back and finally reconnecting with my family, they knew I was heading to New York. They couldn't find me for hours.
Mm.
Finally reconnecting with my family and reconnecting with my girlfriend, who was about to be my fiance, now my wife of 19 years.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and we were watching some of the events to try to understand what had happened on TV. And I walked over. I was with a couple of roommates. I turned the TV off and I said, guys, we can't do this. We can't just sit here and watch this.
Yeah.
And my now my wife and I walked out, and I went to a church for the very first time in a long time for me. And I sat in the back of that church and cried for more hours than I can remember. And something opened up back in me that I wanted to be back in touch with my own humanity
Mm.
and our shared humanity. I wanted to connect to the people around me so that later, now I can articulate the fact that there is so much pain and hurt and trauma that's occurred in this world. And
Yeah.
the more that we continue to walk away from it, the more that these mass types tragedies in all forms, from the big terror events of a 9/11 to
Yeah.
the school shootings that we see weekly at this point, to everything, all these other
Truly.
forms, if we're not willing to turn towards this, to feel what we need to feel, to face that within ourselves, then
Mm.
we're going to keep hurting each other in some way.
Yeah.
And so this all started awaken in me. So you're 22 years ago, almost 22 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
Um, so I knew I needed to go in a different direction. And I hopped from a few different things around. And it was a few years later of moving more into an entrepreneurial capacity that just through happenstance, I was introduced to the field of coaching.
Yeah.
And
And
honest, yeah,
one just thought before that,
please.
because that story, man, I mean, I had goosebumps the whole time you're saying it. It's like it's just intense.
Was.
And I think a question our listener could take from that is asking themselves right now, like, what's something emotional that you've gone through lately that maybe you need to allow yourself to like
Yeah.
take the hit from and
Yeah.
process. And then more importantly, if something's happened, what's the positive thing you can take from it to move in a better
Yeah.
direction in your life, right? That happened to you and you didn't say, I'm going to go back
It's,
to doing what I was doing. You
that's,
took something from it. Yeah.
I did. And where you began, I think, was the most important part of this was, well, I'd say I turned towards to feel it. I didn't really have a choice because I mean, it's just ripped through me. But
Yeah.
whatever we're experiencing that is that intense shift, we have to take the time to feel what we're going through. And
Mm.
so that's what allowed me to then ask questions of,
Mm.
what's the direction that I want to take from here? Where do I want to go? What is this going to mean to me? But I don't know if I could have really asked and begun to answer those questions. And by the way, it's taken me 20 years to answer some of those questions. And I'm
Yeah.
still answering them in different ways every
Yeah.
day. But I couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of those questions if I did not give myself permission to face and feel what I was experiencing.
So are you saying that sometimes we almost numb some of the feelings that we have if it's something so that we don't have to really face it or address it, and we can kind of move on with our life. But the reality is, if we really want to get the direction of our life, we have to sit in that feeling. Like if you're doing something and you're not happy doing it in your life, if you're in the relationship and you're not really excited about it, if you're like whatever it is you're doing and you have that sort of feeling that you keep pushing away of like, yeah, it's not right, I don't like it, I'm not enjoying this, what you're saying is you actually need to go deeper in that, and that's what's going to give you clarity on what's next.
You asked whether we do that sometimes. I'll bluntly say I think society is built on us being that distracted and avoidant of what we're experiencing. I think it happens frequently, more often than not, by far. We need to lean into all of that, because I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to recognize that our thoughts, the beliefs that we have, are really created from our most emotional and energetically intense experiences. That's where these thoughts and these conditionings are typically being ingrained. It's either through intense experience or repeated experience. Those are your two greatest pathways to forming thoughts, which once you have a cluster of thoughts, you have a belief. And so the challenge is, if we don't go in and allow ourselves to feel and process the full experience of the emotion or the energy we've just been through, then any of the thoughts that come out of it are more likely than not thoughts that were trying to get us out of pain and are now in a protective or even fear-based construct paradigm in the way that those thoughts form. And so a lot of what we end up then doing is trying to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, do all those types of things that give us some level of comfort and certainty back in our lives. But that also means that we start to narrow the experience of life, and we start to narrow the possibilities of everything that could be in front of us, because we never allowed ourselves to just fully experience what it is that we've gone through. And I know this is a big ask, because there is unfortunately a lot of trauma that's been experienced in this world. It's a big ask to have people go back and allow themselves to emotionally process through their bodies what it is that they've been through. But we need to, and we need to connect with the support and the professionals and the practitioners, et cetera, that we feel most comfortable with and trusting of, so that we can do that work. We need that healing, and society needs that healing. But it begins with feeling the experience.
Right. So I think another just powerful question is, for our listener, it's like, is there something that you're trying to numb out, right, in your life? And I think something that you could give so much wisdom on is, for our listener going, okay, like I hear there is this thing that I've been numbing out and I haven't really wanted to pay attention to it. And so I'll allow myself to dive deeper into that feeling. What would be a good step for our listener to say, okay, I'm willing to not numb this, I'm willing to really experience this feeling? What's a step they can take from being willing to do that can then help, once they are willing to do that, take them in a positive place?
So the first thing I will say is, depending on the experience that you're processing, you need to determine whether or not you feel safe enough to do this on your own, or whether you believe you should be doing this with a professional. I don't know the experiences, so I just want to use that as a caveat right now, as I don't know everybody's experiences listening in.
Right.
Under general terms, okay, what I would recommend is you want to typically use a somatic-based approach, meaning getting into the body, because that's where the emotion is stored. Now, for me, I'll give you two different pathways. For me, where that began was getting into a somatically based mindfulness meditation practice, so that I would use ways of just literally learning to feel the tension, the stress, as well as the ease that existed in different parts of my body. And as I got to the place, I lived so much of my life from the neck up, and then I rediscovered, oh my God, there's this whole body down here that I should probably be relating to. You can start to then feel where all of this energy and emotion is stored within your body. And then you can bring your awareness, your breath, your attention to that spot, because what you'll realize is very often our emotions and that energy is connected to very specific spots within our body. And so if we can build a relationship with where we're beginning to feel that tension, that stress, that experience, we can bring attention to it and allow the energy to begin to rise, allow the energy to be felt. And if we can stay with it, emotion passes in seconds to minutes. The only way that we actually have emotion that we feel for days and weeks is because we attach it to a story.
Hmm.
Once we attach it to the story, now we can keep re-triggering ourselves to feel that emotion. But if we can allow ourselves to experience the fullness of what it was for a 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of time, you will all of a sudden get to a place where all of a sudden your breath will ease, your body will ease, and you'll start to find this much more relaxed or easeful or open state that you are in. So I mentioned mindfulness practice. The other that I would recommend, which is not as well known, is somatic respiratory integration, or SRI, which is another series of practices that are designed around how is it that we can use our breath, our body, and some subtle movement to begin to feel and release the emotions that have been bound up inside of us. So there's many more modalities than that. I'm just mentioning two right now. But those are some paths to check out. And again, I always say, work with a practitioner of some kind, because you're always going to learn how to go deeper than you can on a YouTube video.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing those. So if we now we kind of sidetrack, we'll go back in your story. And you begin to stumble upon coaching in this industry, which you went on to make an incredible impact in. So fill us in on how did coaching, first come into your life, and sort of what did that chapter of your life look like?
I had started doing some consulting work in small business. Business is under about 35 million or so in sales. And in working with a lot of the entrepreneurs I was working with, I kept noticing some patterns of what, certain successful entrepreneurs were doing versus those who would constantly get stuck. And at that time, I had somebody reach out to me to potentially help them grow their business. And it was this huge email, 20 something questions of how can we do this? How can we do this? How can we do that? All looking for tons of free consulting advice. And it's an email I normally delete. And at the end of the email address, the URL, I caught coaching. And so I naively clicked on the website because I grew up playing sports. So I thought maybe, this is cool. Maybe this is a baseball or football or, whatever company. Right. And I didn't know anything about coaching at the time. I mean, you're talking early 2000s. Right. And so I got open to the field of coaching, and I started to dive into it and recognize this could help the issues I was seeing with entrepreneurs, because it had to do with issues of awareness, issues of self-ownership and self-empowerment. And that started to solve some of the things I was seeing. So anyway, I ended up actually getting hired to consult for the company, for IPAC. And over the course of about 10, 11 months, the founder and I developed a really strong relationship. And he said, listen, I want you to come join us. And so now that's 19 something years ago. And I went on this unbelievable 17-year ride in the coaching industry where, people hardly knew what coaching was at the time. They hardly knew who IPEC was, because even though we were one of the older training institutes, we were one of the smaller ones at the time. And we got to mature not only as a company, but we were maturing and growing as a company while the field was maturing and growing as a field. And so it was this incredible journey and adventure, really, of watching the industry come into its own. And for me, I think in coming back to the kind of that theme of finding direction, I think the thing that was really interesting for me was I ended up becoming the CEO. I was the first CEO after the founder at the age of 32. And by the time I was 38, I was completely burnt out. And I was faced with this series of questions that were having me look at my life and ask effectively, what's wrong? I literally have checked every box that I could imagine. I've achieved, material success. I've achieved professional success. I've got all of it. This is a business that makes a difference in the world. That's doing all this great stuff. And here I am, and I'm feeling burnt out and I'm feeling empty. And so why I bring that up, aside from where that then path goes, was the piece that two pieces I wasn't recognizing. One, I was changing in that process. I was becoming a different person. And so the things that used to be fulfilling and drive purpose for me weren't true anymore. Right. And I wasn't evolving those definitions as I was going, even as I'm sitting in the coaching field. Right. And so I'm the, that moment, I'm the, whatever, the king with the emperor with no clothes on. Right. And so I'm feeling the pressure of that. Right. And then the other thing that I recognized was, and this is what the rest of my, not the rest of, but a major piece of the next stage of this journey has been for me, was that I was doing so much of that creation and success and progress that we had was coming without a deeper connection for me to source. And so I didn't feel a deeper spiritual connection to myself, to whatever it
Yeah.
is we each believe in, that is the higher power for us. I wasn't doing that. It was all kind of this like driving mind over matter
Yeah.
and a lot of that type of energy that, again, even though it was really good, it was really powerful, it was really
Yeah.
purposeful, it did a lot of great things in the world. At some point, you will run out of energy if you are not connected to whatever you consider to be
Yeah.
that deeper source.
Yeah.
And so when those two things all of a sudden were not present, where meaning purpose had changed and source was not connected at that time, I burnt out.
Yeah.
And I had to, ultimately try to figure this all out all over again. And that's been my journey of the last 7+ years.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thought you bring up where, the first piece is like you're changing. And it's such an interesting idea that you can do something in your life and it lights you up. It checks the
Yeah.
boxes. It's like, man, this is it. I'm doing it. But then as you grow over, a handful of months or years, all of a sudden you're doing the
Yeah.
same thing, but you're like, it doesn't hit the same way that it did. And it's because you're growing. And I think that's
Yeah.
such a interesting just piece of your story as well, where it's like you had something that checked your values. It checked,
Mhm.
like you said, your finances, those things, like your success, all those things. And it wasn't that you were doing something that was not good. It's just that you were simply ready for the next chapter of your life. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to give ourselves permission in life to say, okay, this used to be the thing that fulfills me, and I'm growing, and it's just not it anymore. But there's nothing wrong with
Absolutely.
it.
Yep.
It's just that there's something different. And I think it's such a different story than okay, I hate my job. I don't
Yeah.
like this thing. It's like, well, no, the thing I do actually makes a difference, and it's
It's
an
good.
impactful thing. Yeah. But I'm just ready for the next thing. And so, before we dive into the next chapter of your life, and I'm excited to explore
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know
But
you've done,
to what you just brought up though, that moment in time when you realize like this is really like this is a good thing and it's just not like feeling fulfilling anymore, that's terrifying.
yeah,
It was absolutely terrifying because all of a sudden it's like everything that I have worked for is that null and void? Is that gone? And so, and then the idea of I'm actually going to, what if whatever I move towards is so far less than what I have right now?
mm,
Am I really willing to risk all of this to go do something that I
dang,
have no idea what it is? I
yeah,
literally had no idea what it was going to be. And I'm still figuring some of that out, honestly, every single time. I'm loving
yeah,
it. But it's terrifying to be in that position because you, especially as you get into, into the middle-aged demographic, and if you're married or you've got kids or whatever it is that are the individuals you're providing for or supporting in your life, now all of a sudden it's just like you can feel all of that pressure building up.
yeah,
And it was something that ultimately I had to be able to face. Now
mm,
again, I can look back and recognize, and I think this is true for a lot of things in life, not just, jobs, careers, but it's also for relationships and much more. We've got to recognize that, all of life is run in cycles. So it's not
mm,
just that we are born, we live and we die once. I forget I might have been the Dalai Lama, but one of the very, very famous Buddhist
mm,
teachers used to say life is many deaths because we're constantly going around the cycle of life, of birth, life, death, and rebirth. And so it's constantly happening in relationships and in life and in career and all this. And so we get to that stage where it's like, oh my God, is this slipping away? And it feels like you're dying. It feels like your
dang,
identity is dying and you want to hold on so tight because it's like, I don't know
yeah,
where's this going to go? And so we grasp and we cling, and all we're doing is we're perpetuating almost the suffering that we go through, as opposed to recognizing like life is trying to tell you this thing that you're in right now, it's complete.
yeah,
It has fulfilled the purpose it was
yeah,
supposed to fulfill,
damn,
and you don't get to hold on to it any longer.
man, that is freaking. We should just end there. That's that idea, right? Of you have many deaths. It's so interesting because you do chapters close in your life, identities
Yep.
pass in your life, you move on to an identity, and it does feel like there's a death, and it
Yep.
is this sense of that thing. It served the chapter that it was supposed to serve, and a part of you is dying, but that's so that you can grow into a new part of yourself. That's man, that is freaking powerful. That is so
And
cool. So
it's clear, and it's clearing space. I mean, that's, we can get into the next chapter, but it's when you allow for it. I guess this is the part that we don't always get into, we don't always get to talk as much about. When you allow the death to occur, what that also means is that space is being opened back up for you. And in that space, that realm of infinite possibilities can now find you again. But if we're holding on to what was, if we're basically blocking ourselves from that inspiration, that divine connection to come back and say, hey, wait, you did all this because it was preparing you for this next thing over here. If you don't create space, that new thing can't enter. And so it's a dance that we go through. And I'm not saying that it's an easy one, that's for sure. It is a tough journey, but we want to get back into that open space again, because there is so much more that I'm sure you find this with however many guests, and obviously, hearing from your listeners, everything else, how many of us do recognize life is calling to us to say, you've got more. There is something more from you. There is something more for you. And how many of us, when we get quiet with ourselves, listen within beneath those emotions and recognize, you know what, I need to clean some of this stuff in my life up, because there's something so much more in me that I wish to give into this life. And we know that if we would lean into it, it would open us up in incredible ways. It's a vulnerable place to be. But I think every one of your listeners, as you tune in deeper, recognizes there's probably something more that keeps calling you.
It's a beautiful point. And one thing I'm curious to hear from you, and it's perfectly fits in with just exactly what you were saying, is, 19 years with an organization, 17 years. I mean, so many beautiful things I'm sure you learned. So many,
tremendous,
thousands of people you've interacted with. And one thing I'd be curious is, from all the people you've interacted, all the coaching you've done, all the, just time you've spent in the coaching world, what would you say is one of the biggest things you've seen hold people back from living in their purpose?
Okay. I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction than what maybe others would say. I think the biggest thing that holds people back from living their purpose is believing their purpose has everything to do with doing something in this world. Purpose has nothing to do with what you do in this world. It's not your career. It is not your vocation. It is not even the role that you may fulfill as a parent. Purpose is none of those things. Purpose is being who you were born to be. It's a state of being, because every single one of us is this unique creation that can bring energy and bring healing and bring these qualities of compassion and love and truth and peace and all this stuff into the world. And we're focused so much on, well, what are we going to do? Am I, and then insert the label. I get to call myself this. So my purpose is being a coach. No, it's not. My purpose is not being a coach. My purpose is being who it is that I am, with the energy that I have, the presence I have, the calm and the confidence, the balance that I have within my life, and so many other qualities. I happen to get to share it through coaching and through being a parent and through at times teaching and being a guide and by being a man and by being a spouse and by being a friend and et cetera. Right. So I think if we get back to recognizing this is about us becoming the truth of who it is that each of us are, that's what we want to lean into. And so the catch, why do people not do it, is because they're trying to connect it to the one thing, right? Think back to, you ever see City Slickers? You watch that movie? Anyway, back with Billy Crystal and Jack Palance. Anyway, an older movie, dating myself a little bit here, but they talk about what's the one thing? What's the one thing? Well, the problem is most of us think the one thing is something that's out there that we do in the world. It's not. The only one thing is right here. And it's in each and every single one of us. And if we would focus here and becoming this version of ourselves, the rest of it will take care of itself.
And it'll go into all areas of your life, like you said.
Every area of your life.
Beautiful. So So let's go back to your story then. So,
Sure.
you have this realization of, okay, I've been with this coaching,
Yeah.
industry, and it's made an impact, but like we were saying, I'm changing, it's not connected me to source, and
Yep.
there's somewhere that I'm supposed to go next. So, I know you went on sort of a 12-month like exploration, right? Of
Yeah.
just diving deep into yourself, going on the walk, just like your
Yeah.
podcast, right?
Yep.
And, you know, what would you say are some of the biggest lessons you got from that sort of 12-month stint? And maybe you can share with our listeners as well,
Sure.
a little bit of, what that 12 months looked
Yeah.
like as well.
Sure. Sure. It was a process that actually led up to that 12 months. Because once I had that realization, I was burnt out and things needed to go in a different direction. It took some time to unwind that. And why I
Yeah.
mention that is that the beginning part of kind of that year plus of walking, so to speak, was that I needed a few things. I needed decompression time, meaning I quite literally needed to get back into that open space. I needed to recognize just how entangled I was with these labels, these aspects of identity,
Mm.
the ways in which I was even trying to work out my own healing in life. So, as an example of one of those entanglements, or two of these entanglements, one was that even though it usually came from a great intention, I
Yeah.
still was trying to control life. I was still
Mm.
using control to try to get life to match up to the types of expectations that I had for life. And life doesn't work that way. Life is going
Yeah.
to keep changing and moving and shifting and everything else, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, how do I actually begin to have and develop trust and faith in the way that life unfolds, and trust and faith in myself, so that I can meet the unfolding of life and recognize what's trying to happen here. And so I
Mm.
had to unentangle that sense of control, because control came out of fear. It came out of uncertainty. It came out of those types of things that I was not comfortable with dealing with, and therefore would try to control what was going on to feel better about them. So there was a
Yeah.
lot of healing that needed to take place under that. Now, what that yielded into was, okay, I can give up control. I'm moving past that. I just need to have a really, really, really clear picture. I need to know, how is this going to unfold? So now my next
Mm.
thing was always putting this reliance on, I've got to have clarity. I've got to know all the steps. I've got to know for me
Yeah.
to then be able to pour myself into the next thing. It's just another form of
Mm.
control. It was basically saying, life,
Yeah.
life, tell me that this is all going to work out. Show me how it's going to work out, and then I'll trust it. It's bullshit. It doesn't work. Never works that way.
Yeah.
And
True.
so it was just a different manifestation of the way that I was still trying to control or keep control of myself during this journey. So I had to get a lot of that unentangled. How did I do that? I did it through coaching. I did it through working with a spiritual teacher. I
Mm.
did it through a tremendous amount of time in nature. Nature has been the
Yeah.
greatest healing medicine that I could have ever had.
Yeah.
And when I say being out in nature, I don't mean, yes, I did a lot of hiking. I did a lot of time, spent some time in the water and things like that. But it was actually developing a relationship with nature, like being able to sit down
Mm.
and have a tree or have a river or a stream or a plant or a bird be your teacher, to sit quiet enough to actually learn from the way that nature is always restoring balance. It's always restoring itself to a higher order. It always does.
Mm.
Nature is always working in collaboration with each other. Uh, Various, in even carnivorous animals, they don't take more than they need to survive. They're not parasites. And so the
Yeah.
more that we live and learn to connect with nature in that way, all of a sudden we start to recognize the laws of being back in balance, the laws of being in peace, the laws of being in cooperation with each other. They're already figured out. Nature's already got it, right? It's
Yeah.
already there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We believe that we're separate from nature, as opposed to recognizing we are nature. And so in developing that type of relationship, which I did through both teachers, coaching, some extraordinary indigenous wisdoms that had been passed through a teacher to me, a couple of teachers to me. Those were all big parts of my journey. A lot of journaling, a lot of meditating,
Yeah.
a lot of circling, being able to, so circling, if your listeners aren't as familiar with that, it's a way of very specifically meeting with a small group of people for intimacy, so that which you would normally journal is something you are now learning to vocalize, to express, so that you're
Mm,
learning to put voice to what is that inner teacher, that inner voice that's within each and every single one of us. So how do we learn to
interesting.
express from that place of truth, of honesty, of vulnerability? And the reason why that's so important is that journaling, meditation, you don't get witnessed. But when you share more of the truth of what you're going through and what you're learning and how you're going to begin to integrate it in your life, and it gets witnessed by people who can hold that space for you and hold you as you step into this image of yourself
Yeah.
and step into that greater centered being that you are, it pulls you forward in a very, very different way. It creates this beautiful community aspect to our evolution. And so that
Mm,
was also yet another really important part of my journey.
yeah. Dang. So many beautiful aspects of that journey. And so, as you come to, I guess, as you go through the 12 months,
Mhm.
how did you decide to design the next chapter of your life, right? Because you take the 12 months off, you're learning, you're
Yep.
not, watching Netflix for 12 months. You're like diving deep into yourself and learning and studying
Yeah.
and growing and doing all these things. And it sounds like you had so much wisdom you gained from that. So as you went through that, how did you then go and say, okay, now I'm going to build and
Mhm.
design this next chapter of my life, which has
Mhm.
really become the last, I think you said it lasts about 7 years of your life now.
Yeah. It's it's funny to answer it this way. Um, I haven't designed a lot of it.
Hmm.
And what now this is different for everybody. So I'm not going to say that
Yeah.
this is like a one size fits all approach,
Yeah.
but part of kind of who I am and part of my design is this recognition. I've been very fortunate and I draw a lot of possibilities and opportunities to me. And part of that, to be honest, isn't just that I draw them to me, it's just that I'm aware of them. And I think that a lot of opportunities are brought to everybody. We're just not always aware of just how
Hmm.
much is coming our way because we're not paying attention. We're not looking for the signs that are there. And so what I've really done is I have spent if I were to say what I've designed,
Yeah.
I have designed a very deeply intimate relationship with my inner voice because I'm then able to recognize when either ideas come from me or from opportunities that are brought my way. I can recognize deep resonance in that which is aligned and I want to
Mm.
move forward on versus those that feel dissonant or those that feel like they're coming from an older part of myself that wants to prove myself or wants to
Mm.
say I've got something really solid to refer to that gives me certainty. And so now I can feel as I move each day, each week, each month forward, I can feel which of those feel like they're in the
Huh.
deepest alignment for me. As a
Yeah.
result, I've traveled down the path of a few different opportunities aside. So I still do some coaching. I do, as you mentioned, on this walk, which is my own podcast.
Yeah.
Those that on this walk is it's a bit of a passion project. It's to me, it's
Yeah.
a kind of a piece of art for myself to be able to express in the world. And I'm thoroughly enjoying that path. I do
Yeah.
coaching, but I've also traveled to, kind of advise a handful of companies, several of which wanted me to get more involved with them in different ways. And I had to feel my way through which of those were ones I'd want to be part of, which ones I would not.
Mm.
And some I engaged with very, very briefly, some I engaged with for a longer period of time, and then had to have the self honesty and integrity to myself and to my path to recognize when something was not working out a certain way to stop and
Hmm.
to say, wow, I thought that might be the next thing, but it's not. And as a
Yeah.
result of doing that, I'm now working with one company and it looks like a second other that are deeply aligned to who I am.
Mm.
And so I think the one of those lessons that's in there as well was that when we get into that space where there is more opening, where there feels like there's emptiness, all too often we move too quickly to refill it. So
Mm.
after we have created all of this wonderful space for new opportunities, possibilities, new insights, new wisdoms to come in, it's like, okay, well, it's been a year. I should be doing something now. I've got to
Yeah.
tell people I'm doing something. I'm not just
Yeah.
watching Netflix, as you say, right?
Yeah.
So I need something to hang my hat on. And if I had done that, I would have cut off the opportunities that I am now in the midst of.
Mm.
And they would not have unfolded. They never would have found me. They couldn't have found me if I had filled that space up too quickly. And so to develop that
Dang.
that discernment to really recognize that which is deeply resonant with this new space, this new, state of being that you have been able to emerge into. You want to you want to honor that. And
Yeah.
you honor that by making sure the choices that you are making are deeply aligned and that you don't fall back on just rushing into something to feel like you're recommitting, you're filling it back up again.
Yeah. What are a few ways people can build a closer relationship with that inner voice?
So it's a bunch of things. A lot of things I've referenced. So maybe I'll just kind of pick a few.
Cool.
I believe that getting back in touch somatically with our bodies through things
Yeah.
like mindfulness meditation or those types of practices is vital because we hold so much wisdom physically in who we are. And when we get our bodies online, our emotions online, and all of a sudden we can kind of hear this and connect to this deeper intuition that's there,
Yeah.
that's something that bypasses the mind. And so we need practices that get us out of our mind and back into our bodies because that connects us to the present moment in time. And that's where intuition can find us. And
Mm.
that's when I talk about inner voice, very often that's a form of intuition that comes through.
Yeah. Okay.
And so getting into our bodies, number one, mindfulness meditation is a great starting point for that. Journaling is another one that I referenced. And personally, the journaling that's meant the most to me in developing that inner voice, I
Yeah.
actually do it through effectively journaling dialogues, meaning that I'll use the example of Neil Donald Walsh has one of the most famous ones. He used this and it became Conversations with God. And
Mm.
I
Yeah.
would, I will write journals with my higher self at
Yeah.
times with mentors, past mentors of mine, mentors who have moved on to new space, into transition into death. And
Mm.
I will basically write it as if it was like a screenplay of, here's me writing about who I am, what I'm experiencing, what are my questions. And I'll sit and center myself in stillness until I feel like I'm getting an answer from either my higher self or whoever it is that I've chosen to write with
Yeah.
that day. And then you'll see a
Mm.
stream of consciousness come through. More often than not, they have a sense of humor and they just ask you a question back, and then all of a sudden you have your answer.
Yeah.
But it's a different way of dialoguing with the different levels of
Totally.
consciousness that we have. And then honestly, I can go into many others. I would go back to circling, which I described before,
Right.
because
Okay.
when we learn to put our physical voice to that deeper inner voice, you're strengthening the connection that is there. And you're learning to move that which you're connecting to within you out into reality so that it can be seen by you, that it can be witnessed by others. And that to me it has repeatedly proven to be an incredibly powerful tool,
Yeah.
because then it's like when you speak something that has come from that deeper inner knowing, that
Right.
deeper inner teacher, and you speak it and you see it and others witness it, it's like, I can't deny that just came out. Like
Yeah.
I can fold over my journal page. I can flip to the next one. I can pretend that I didn't get that insight in meditation. But if I speak it aloud and other people are holding space in this beautiful, accepting, trusting place,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're like, wow, that really did come from within
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And you start to own it.
Those yeah. Those are beautifully laid out ways that I think everybody can get to know that inner voice. And I've seen it again and again with myself and also with guests we've had on the show, that it's like those that really do build that relationship with that inner voice, with intuition, it's like those are people that live in their calling and alignment. Those are people that are
Yeah.
walking a journey of fulfillment, passion, happiness when they're connected with that. So thank you for giving
Yes.
those beautiful, beautiful ways people can do that.
And I will just add, you can recognize those individuals by the way you feel in their presence. You can,
Mm.
when somebody
Yeah,
is deeply connected, you can actually feel the presence of
totally.
the peace, the centeredness that is just emanating from who they are.
Yeah.
And when you're around that, you recognize just how much you want to bring yourself into that position too.
Yeah.
Truly own yourself.
Yeah. I love it. So, a few last questions I have for you.
Sure.
One that's sort of different, but in doing some research, I heard you bring this idea up, and I just wanted to
Uh,
hear your thoughts and would love for you to expand on it. But how do we give ourselves permission sometimes to walk forward in a path if we're not certain that that may necessarily be the path that we're supposed to go down?
yeah. I I look at it in, well, again, a few ways. One is to hold yourself with both compassion and gentleness. So to know, I'll go, actually, let me answer it this way. Let me change that, because
Mhm.
the name of this show is Finding Direction.
Yeah.
It's not finding the one direction. It's not finding the thing. It's finding direction. And the reason why that's important is that we're not always going to know exactly what that next thing is, but we may know what the next step is. And to me, that's taking direction. And so
Mm.
if we can move in a direction and move in with conviction, but also keep your head up, keep your eyes peeled, and be aware of the fact that maybe you were supposed to move in this direction, not because that's the path, the end path you're going on, but because that introduced you to somebody or something that you never would have found
Right.
otherwise. And the number
Yeah.
of times I've had that be true in my life, and I am living that right now with some of the
Yeah.
stuff that I'm getting into, I couldn't have possibly predicted the path that my life has taken.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have planned it either.
Amen to
So
that.
to hold yourself with compassion and gentleness as you go on that direction, to go with curiosity,
Mm.
approach the next stage that you go into as an exploration,
Mm.
and to hold it as an exploration, and recognize that, hey, maybe there's something here that's really, really grand. Or maybe this was just meant to move me to the next bus stop because there's going to be somebody on that bench that I was supposed to meet.
Mm.
You don't know that. So go with that
Beautiful.
sense of curiosity, exploration, a little bit of wonder and awe.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, your eyes will be open to all the possibilities that unfold with that direction that you've
Yeah.
taken.
Amazing. Amazingly said. Man, it has been beyond an honor to have you on here, Luke.
Thank you.
We could be here for hours on end. And so I'm curious, for our listener, if they're going, man, I need to hang out with Luke more. I need to see what he's up to, get in your world. Where's the best place that our listener can go to spend more time with you?
Oh, thanks, Stu. On
Yeah.
this walk. So on this walk, quite literally, you want to come hang out with me, listen to the podcast, look it up. We're on all the things. If you're listening right here, it's on the same player you're listening to right now.
Yeah.
And it's on thiswalk.com. You can find me there. You can find all my socials there. Cause I do a lot of sharing. I do run a community group for On This Walk, all those things, but that's the best way to be in touch, to walk together for a while and, see how we can share some of this journey.
Amazing. Love it, love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. One last question I have for you. We ask this
Yeah.
to all of our guests because we want to help people find direction, but again, do it through action. Is what would you say is one thing our listener can do in the next 24 to 48 hours to start finding direction in their life?
Absolutely. I would go on a walk. If you can, ideally on a nature trail of some kind. If not, find a local park. All right. Just something so that you feel the nature that's around you.
Mhm.
And I will pass along a question to you that was passed to me many years ago. What is it that you are pretending not to know in order to have the challenge that you think you have? So I say it that way. What is it that you are pretending not to know for you to have the challenge that you think you have? I say that because very often the beginning path of finding the next
Mm.
direction is facing the very challenge that you believe is in front of you right now. And more often than not, we already know how to face that challenge. We already know what we need to admit to ourselves about it. But if we will face it and we will clear it and we will clean it up however we need to, we now
Yeah.
create space for the deeper intuition, the deeper insights, and the next path to reveal itself.
Amazing. Can you say the question one more time?
Sure. Let me make sure I phrase it the same way.
Yeah.
What is it that you are pretending not to know in order for you to have the challenge that you think you have? And
Mm.
it is asked in that tongue twister kind of way, very intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Luke, thank you again. Beyond words for being here today. So much wisdom, so much just gold nuggets sprinkled through this whole conversation. I'm going to go listen to it myself a few times. For our listeners, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. Obviously, check out what Luke's doing, hang out with him on the podcast. And thank you again so much for being here,
Thank you,
Luke.
Stu.
Massively
Thank you,
appreciate
Stu.
it.
This was great.